In this video, I'm going to be looking at the final Beys in the Burst generation, which is sad, but kind of a good thing. With the release of Beyblade X, we move on to our 4th generation of Beyblade. But unlike every other generation, X came out right after the end of Beyblade Burst. In fact, if you go to your local store right now, you might be able to find both series on shelves at the same time. And that's what happened to me. I went to my local Target trying to find Talon-Terra of all Beys, and I found that they had a small little section of Beyblade Burst that was on a 30% clearance, and I just had to get it. You may be wondering why I would spend my money on an old and kind of dead series of Beyblade, and that's a pretty good question, but I just feel like I kind of had to. And despite the fact I'm not really the biggest Quad Strike fan, I feel like I owe it to the Beyblade Burst series to give them their last little bit of attention before they're off the shelves forever. With that 30% off clearance price, I was able to get 3 Quad Strike boosters for $6.99 each. What is kind of wild is that the original price is $9.99, and that's the same price as a standard Beyblade X starter, so pretty big quality difference for the same price. The first booster I was able to get was Fierce Achilles A8. This left spin Bey is a odd kind of Hasbro coloring of the Achilles chip, as well as their Hasbro exclusive Fierce Blade. And just for the future of this video, I'm going to be calling the parts by their names, not their dumb Hasbro codes. I don't really want to call parts QD08, TB14Q. We'll just call them normal names. For the performance tip, we have Zephyr Q, and the armor tip is called Flap. It's a pretty interesting name, but Flap is this kind of big old blue disc shape with a semi-flat tip. I will say though, the design that's kind of baked into the piece is pretty nice. Even though this video is about the final Hasbro Beyblade Burst releases, if you want to get some of the latest X Beys, go and check out sponsor of the channel Mall of Toys. They have all the newest releases like Dran Buster, Wizard Rod, Shinobi Shadow, and even the upcoming Cobalt Dragoon up for pre-order. Cobalt Dragoon is going to be insane, and it releases in like 2 weeks. So go and check out Mall of Toys, links in the description down below, and make sure you use code ilinnuc to get 5% off. The Forge disc is Aquilon Q, which is just this triangular A-shaped piece. It's not really super heavy at all, so I didn't really have much to say about it. And then finally, we can move on to the chip and blade combo, which is Fierce Achilles. I will say, I do like the blue and yellow color combination. Those colors do work well together. And I do like the kind of metallic paint going around the outside of the blade, although there's just no detail here, especially in that Achilles chip. It's really hard to see any of the design work that Takara Tomy put in, and then Hasbro kind of changed up a little bit. So it just looks really bland, and at least there's a little bit of purple here, I guess. And I will say, after putting the whole Bey together, I kind of forgot just how big these end-of-series Burst Beys are, especially when you compare them to Beyblade X. I can also say, I don't really miss it though. I much prefer the smaller and more agile X stuff versus the hockey pucks we got at the end of Burst. For the next booster, we have Zyo Knight K8. I will say, I do like the idea of this booster quite a bit, mixing parts from Zyo Excalius and Whirl Knights, or whatever the Hasbro name is. For the performance tip, we have Assault, which is great, especially in this nice pink color. Assault is one of my favorite drivers from the Takara Tomy side of the game at least. But then we have the armor tip, which is apparently Quattro, which, if you don't remember Quattro, that was the driver that came with Astral Spriggan that had 4 different modes. That's why it was named Quattro. But for the Hasbro version, we just have a really wide flat or semi-flat, so kind of defeats the purpose of the Quattro name in total. For the disc, we have a pretty cut down version of Nexus, which is not a new disc at all, so we're just gonna kind of skip past that. And then finally, we move on to the chip and blade. And like I said earlier, I like the idea of this. And I think the sword design from Zyo and the knight face from the knight chip work pretty well together. And I do kind of like the blue and pink color scheme. It's not really something that's super common in Beyblade Burst. I don't think we ever saw that with the Takara Tomy side. But the execution here is just kind of off. Going back to that Fierce Achilles booster, I mentioned how I liked the yellow metallic paint. Why they didn't do the same here with the blue and pink, I don't really know. There's also the fact that they chose probably the ugliest gray color for a majority of the Xiphoid blade. It just kind of looks like one of those Takara Tomy prototypes where it's not finished yet and it's not what it's supposed to look like, but it is. This piece definitely had a lot of potential, I think, and I would have loved to have seen Takara Tomy do it in like a random booster or something, but the execution from Hasbro is just not great. And the final booster we have is Twister Pandora. This one is a bit more unique than the other boosters I've talked about because it was actually in the Quad Strike anime. While I'm not as well versed in the plot or the characters of Quad Strike, I do know that a big theme for the season was elemental Beys, and Pandora had 4 different versions that went along with 4 different elements. And here we have Twister Pandora, and it's a bit on the lamer side compared to the other versions. Let's just talk about the parts. For the performance tip, we have freaking Edge. It should be no surprise that I am an Edge hater. I'm not a fan of this performance tip slash driver ever since we got it in that pre-anime series from Beyblade Burst. I'm not a fan. I don't think it's good. For the armor tip, we have Rumble, which is a pretty wide, large, and just very armored armor tip. Kind of fits into the name. And it's in this kind of teal green color, which isn't my favorite, but it does kind of work with the orange color scheme of the Bey for the most part. I will say though, it is pretty interesting that every armor tip I've talked about in this video has some form of semi-flat as the tip. Next up, we have the Forge Disc, which is Kwachu? This is not a new Forge Disc at all. We actually saw it with one of the Hasbro exclusive Beys back in Quad Drive, which was Katana Muramasa. And while the name is a little bit harder to say, it has this kind of samurai sort of design to it, and it's one of the cooler Hasbro exclusive discs. And now we can move on to the blade and chip combination with Twister Pandora. The color scheme here is pretty interesting, as they have been for all of these boosters, with a green, white, and orange. I don't love it, but I mean, it works. And the blade is pretty round and pretty thick as well, which makes sense because this is a defense type Beyblade at the end of the day. It's not perfect though. There is one side of the blade that has a little bit of a cutout, and that is going to be the weak point, especially for bursts. While I'm sure it's a little bit too late at this point, the idea for Quad Strike is sort of interesting with the elemental Beys, and I've heard pretty good things about it. So if seeing a big Quad Strike anime review is something you'd be interested in, let me know in the comments. Now this is where I would typically battle the Beys that I've just opened, but I'm not going to. I didn't get these Beys to battle with or to review their performance. I got them because they're the last bit of life that Beyblade Burst has left. Whether you're sad that Beyblade Burst is over or happy that a new and improved generation is taking over, at the end of the day, this is it. While some stores may have a bigger selection of Burst stuff, all the places around me have either a mix of X and these clearance boosters, or just no Beyblades at all. While I am on the side of being happy that Burst is over and X is really beginning, it's still a bit of a bittersweet feeling, knowing that Burst is done. Not just because the final episode has been released, but because these things are being clearanced and soon will be off shelves entirely. And once again, as a longtime Beyblade fan, it was pretty wild to see 2 different generations of Beyblade on the shelves at the same time. And whenever you compare them both together, you can really see which one is the better buy. But those were the final Burst Beys. Thank you guys for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel if you liked it, and I will see you in the next one. Have fun, and Bey away.